What's up, everybody? Welcome to House Divided on Orange Bloods Live. I'm Jeff Ketchum. No Chad Hastings today. He's still on a boat somewhere in an ocean, hopefully having a good time with his family. It's just little old me doing the show today with lots of good Texas football conversation. Do us a solid like, comment, subscribe to the page. You can scan QR codes. You can do all kinds of things. You can check out our title sponsors, the Texas Card House and the guys over at Hijack Poker. It's real simple. They've got the best card games all over the state of Texas. They've got the app. You can play online against real people for real money. It's as simple as that. Also, jump into the Specs chat if you're going to chat. I see Chris Bennett already populating the chat. We appreciate it. What up, Chris? You've been on your tweet game lately. Just FYI, I also see you, Mark Ruiz. Yo, back to you, or should I say, yo. So I was thinking about like what I wanted to talk about today as it relates to Texas football. And I found myself thinking about Steve Sarkeesian and really a topic that I haven't written about yet. And I kind of just started really thinking about it a little bit today. And I probably will think about this all week long, and this will turn into something that's a part of my 10 Thoughts from the Weekend on orangebloods.com in a few days. But I was thinking about one of my favorite things about Steve Sarkeesian. I call it one of his superpowers. I think he has a lot of superpowers, but I think this is one of his best. And I didn't know this about Sarkeesian until I covered him. And you watch the guy for a few years and you learn a little bit about how his brain works and how his decision-making works. And as a guy that's now been in the business for a quarter of a century, I covered John Malkovich, I covered Mac Brown, I covered everything that's happened since then. I now have been around long enough that I have an idea of like what I have a large enough sample size to know Steve Sarkeesian's strengths and weaknesses compared to other guys in the exact same job that I've seen previously. And one of the things that I think that Sarkeesian is heads and shoulders above, better than anybody else that I've personally covered. And I've talked about this on the show, but I think it makes for an interesting topic today. I think Steve Sarkeesian adjusts his thinking. I think his ability to change directions on the fly sometimes, to not dig in deep. And, if he has a set of core beliefs, he's not married to his core beliefs. Not if he comes around to a line of thinking that there's a better way of having core beliefs. So I don't think he's a very stubborn guy. I think he learns lessons. I think we've seen, I think NIL is a perfect example of this. I think 2 years ago, 3 years ago, in the early stages of NIL and how offers were being given, there was Texas had some success, but I think they learned lessons. And I think along the way, one of the things that they decided, unprompted, nobody was pushing for this to occur, they adjusted. It is Steve Sarkeesian's ability to adjust is one of my favorite things about him. And they decided, you know what? What have we learned? NIL offers early, going in big early, it's a problem. So what are we going to do? We're not going to give out NIL offers early. I mean, we'll make an exception. We'll go to Corey and more. If a guy's important enough and that is a thing that has to be on the table, then we'll step up our games. But just like everything else, they kind of wedge this into kind of their general ethos as recruiters. They like to finish late. They don't like to babysit. Sarkeesian's not automatically worried about his commitment list, certainly on June 4th. He's just not. There's sometimes I think he'd rather just get all of his commitments on December 1st because then he doesn't have to play defense with any of them. But, of course, he takes his commitments. And with a guy like Diabell, you want to have that guy as your show pony in a recruiting class, like all that stuff, yes. But what we saw them adjust last year was on the NIL side, we'll come in late, we'll come in hard, and we will come in a way that does not make it easy for others to respond to. And the Justice Terry situation is a perfect example. He's sitting there looking to make a decision late. Georgia is thought to be the team to beat. Georgia has commitments from 2 other 5-star defensive tackles in that class. I think Texas sensed some real vulnerability. and their decision to wait until later in the game to move forward with NIL decisions and amounts and everything connected to it, it allowed them to then go in late with Justice Terry, make a move, make a NIL pitch, and Georgia couldn't counter it and didn't have enough time to think long and hard of how could we counter this. What they might have known a couple of months later is that the markets would change to the extent that maybe Texas got a steal in Justice Terry, that the prices of what's taking place in 2026 recruiting is elevating in this, at least for now, uncontrolled free market. We'll see what happens if there's ever a settlement. And that's another show. That might be tomorrow's show. But Texas goes in. They do the Justice Terry thing. Georgia can't respond. Nobody else really responds. Clock runs out. Texas gets Justice Terry. And I think we'll see Texas do kind of the same approach again this year. And one of the things we were saying at this time last year about the NIL decisions was that Texas, they felt like the LSUs of the world and some of the other schools that were going big early would find themselves vulnerable late because schools would have 6 months, 7 months, 8 months to know exactly what their pitch is and then to be able to go in late with a big offer. Bryce Underwood may be the best example of that exact thing that we're talking about. It's what do you do when someone comes in late with a mega offer and you're not prepared for it? And maybe LSU, maybe they get Michigan at the gun with Bryce Underwood if all of that had happened in June and they'd had 5 months to figure it out. Because look at what ended up happening. LSU got super motivated. Their base got energized. They've suddenly been active in the portal. Suddenly they've been active in early recruiting again, but this time seemingly with a bigger stick to swing on the NIL front. I think that you're going to see Texas do the same thing again. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. What isn't fixed now that needs to be fixed? Another one in the portal. I think this is a really good example. And there's a bunch of stuff with regards to the portal and recruiting that we've seen Sarkeesian change tactics on. You know, when he first got here, he was only really interested in guys with SEC pedigrees. He'll take the leftover SEC trash. No offense to any of the names that I'll mention, but the Ben Davies of the world, the Ray Thorntons of the world. It was like, oh, well, they're LSU and Alabama's leftovers, and that's better than anything that you'll find anywhere else. And I think they adjusted, and we've seen them now. While they mostly focus after school players from big schools, it's not, you know, when they went and got the Watson kid out of Syracuse a couple of years ago, that doesn't happen. Steve Sarkeesian would have been like, I'll take Alabama's 5-star fifth-year senior who's from Alabama and I know him over some guy that did it in the ACC for a year, like whatever. I think that's an example. I think we've seen the numbers and volume. Sarkeesian, just a couple of years ago, if you told him, hey, man, you're going to have 45 incoming players, I think Sarkeesian instinctively would have been like, sweet, 40 of them were coming from high school. I mean, if you go back to a few years ago, they took a massive high school class. And what have we seen? Last year, they hit the brakes. Last year, they got to about 25. They hit the brakes. They had to save room for portal guys. And it wasn't even that long ago that Sarkeesian would say things like, oh, man, we're going to be the foundation as high school kids. And while that hasn't completely changed, we do know that they are taking more portal guys than ever. They are depending on the portal more than ever to solve problems. They are going now into the portal. One of the adjustments they made in this year's was less seniors, less guys that are going to be off of the depth chart in a year from now, and more, what if we go get guys that can help us in multiple seasons? Where do we see that? They go out and get Emmett Mosley, the wide receiver who has 3 years of eligibility remaining after having done it at Stanford. They go out and get Jack Indries, who, may or may not play 2 more seasons. Maybe this is it for him, but he arrives as a starter at tight end with 2 seasons of eligibility remaining. 2 seasons, not an insignificant detail. You think about the defensive tackle position. Hero Kanu, Lavon Johnson, Murad Watson, all of those guys with multiple seasons of eligibility remaining. Watson, a guy they went big with on NIL. Well, if you're going to make a big NIL commitment to a guy like that, maybe make sure you're getting more than a 6-month rental out of him. Again, Texas does a real phenomenal job of making sure that if they're going to invest in the portal, if you can find guys that can give you more than a season, it's worth more than guys that can give you a season. We saw it at the linebacker position. Brad Spence arrives. He's got 2 seasons of eligibility remaining. So that's a lot. That's different than what they've been doing. So, again, the question I had, and I'm curious, I'd love to see it in the chat. What are the areas that you think Sarkeesian and company in the next 12 months need to make adjustments on, need to tweak a little bit? I've got a few in my head. I think the most important thing to say is that they've really got it cooking a little bit, that you don't recruit at the level that they recruit at. You don't build the talent base to the level that they've been able to build it at, which is basically top 3 in the country. You don't get to a point where the ESPN FBI index is saying you're the number 1 team in the preseason with the number 1 offense in the country and the number 1 defense in the country. It's still funny. Like, that's where we are. So it's important on the outset to say these are, at this point in time, I think, trivial nitpicks. These are the tweaks that can make a program that's already on the cusp of winning a national championship. Maybe this is the thing that either gets them to a national championship, or these are the things that can sustain a dynasty. I don't know. This is where Texas is. I think on the field, isn't it the most obvious? Because I've been looking at the chat and I haven't seen it yet. And yes, Michelle, I think this is a good idea for a show. I think it's an interesting conversation, but there does have to be an acknowledgement that we're not talking about a program that's 5-7 or 8-5 or 10-2 and trying to make the jump. This isn't OU. This isn't A&M. This is preseason probable number 1 in the country. That being said, Michelle, if we were talking about on field, the areas where you're waiting to see Sarkeesian make an adjustment, I think there's some off the field tweaks that I would make that could streamline, make things a little bit better. And this isn't my most important. I'll get to that in a little bit. But on the field, it's red zone, right? It's red zone. It is 2 seasons in a row now. Texas has not been good in the red zone. A year ago at this time, they were so poor in the red zone in the 2023 season that they spent the entire 2024 offseason. Admittedly, Sarkeesian showed up on the first day of August workouts and said, yep, red zone, that's where we put a ton of effort into. And then it really didn't get better. It was an issue all season long. It reared its ugly head in the biggest moment of the season. And we don't need to relitigate that. We all remember the end of the Ohio State game. I feel like it's been referenced 500 times in the first 2 shows and 14 minutes of a third one this week. But it's got to get better. It's interesting to me that, I think Texas is going more to, I think they think a power run game concept for them helps them with this group of players. I don't know that I completely buy that, but I understand potentially doing the exact same thing that you've been doing that hasn't completely worked out in a perfect world to brought the best out of the likes of Neto Umuzalo or even a Cole Hudson. I don't know. Because we're going to see them try to be a little man-on-man power football. We know they've got Arch Manning at quarterback, and that area's just got to get better. And it's been a thing in Steve Sarkeesian's career. In fact, it's funny because I give Sarkeesian so much credit for his ability to adjust on the fly. And the very first thing I go to is the thing that maybe he struggled the most with. And maybe there's a difference. Maybe it's slower on the field. Maybe it's harder on the field. Like I don't do today's show with like daggers at all. It's not like, look how terrible he is in this area. I think I'm just trying to have like a real honest conversation, right? And the red zone's an area that needs to get better. It is a thing that has followed him in his career. It was startling. It was a few months ago. I did a Twitter search on Sarkeesian red zone. It was either Sark red zone or Sarkeesian red zone. And all of you can do it at home. This is one of these where you can, but don't do it now. Wait till you hear what I have to say. And then if you want to do it afterwards, at least you listened to the Surgeon General's, you read the Surgeon General's warning, okay? Because I inadvertently, what I was doing, I was trying to find the quote from the press conference where Sarkeesian came out and talked about all the work that they'd done. And I looked for it. I couldn't find Anwar's story that had it in it. So I went to Twitter and I figured, well, it'll be there. So I typed it in and I did find it. But in addition to typing in Sarkeesian red zone, it was a history of Twitter of Sarkeesian and the red zone. And there was stuff that just went back to his days with the Falcons. And there were like 100 tweets where it was like Sarkeesian on the 1 yard line in the NFL was a problem. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize this was the thing, but it's been a thing for a while. So on the field, the red zone can get better. Beyond that, it's hard to say, well, the kicking game needs to be better. Well, no shit, right? I mean, every player on the team needs to be better, if at all possible. I mean, that's not even really that wouldn't even be part of the conversation I would have. It wouldn't be, well, you got to get better guys, defensive tackles, or talent acquisition. The answers always get better. And on the field, I don't really have a real quick Pete Kwiatkowski right now. Let's see what the Arch Manning era looks like. And if at the end of this first cycle of Arch Manning, there are still things with the offense that feel player proof, that it's more about this is what's happening every single year, regardless of who the quarterback is or the change of talent right now. My nitpicks are on the field, it's kind of red zone. Everything else, I'm not really nitpicking. I mean, boy, if they play well, they're really good. They play well on the road. They beat the teams they're supposed to beat. So it's really hard to nitpick Steve Sarkeesian and his staff, I think, as coaches on the field. I think one of the areas off the field that will be really interesting this year, and to me, this was honestly the thought that I had. I see some of the questions in the chat. Here's the thing. When you're going solo, sometimes, I need to look into the camera and I need to not be staring at the chat, but I will circle back on this because there are some interesting things going on in the chat with regards to this discussion that are worthy of discussing, but I want to kind of continue, roll out what I wanted to get into. I will circle back. So last year in the portal, because this is going to happen in December. The portal's going to occur, and there's a good chance that Texas is going to be playing in an SEC championship game in the first week of December. There's a good chance, there's like an 85% chance, 84% chance, whatever the numbers were on that ESPN FBI index, that Texas was going to be in the playoffs. So they'll be getting ready for playoff games. If they get a bye, they'll be on that late December, early January schedule, the major bowl games. But, they will be juggling they'll be juggling signing day, an SEC championship game week, getting ready for the playoffs. And oh yes, the portal is going to open up. What Texas found out this year that there was no lived experience for them to really rely on. what it meant to be playing in the first round of the playoffs and then in the round of the quarterfinals and then in the semifinals, 3 straight playoff games with all of that going on. The thing that really suffered was the portal. And the reason why the portal suffered was because they were in the middle of the season. And I think Sarkeesian would say what they correctly didn't negotiate with their players until after the season. Maybe that's just not a conversation that you want to have, right? The issue is by waiting until after the season to do all of their and if they'd won a national championship, it would have potentially been even more difficult because the end of that championship runs out. You know what I mean? You then, it's like as soon as the season's over and you play for a championship, now you are immediately, win, lose, draw, whatever, you have to then immediately save all those players, which is what Texas did. In the week immediately after losing to Ohio State, they went on their massive retention plan. But it is the thing that really kept them out of the portal outside of a strong play from Emmanuel Pregnon, the offensive lineman from USC, other than, well, they played footsie with some guys. They played footsie with the kid from Purdue that goes to Ohio State, but they didn't go all in because they didn't want to make an offer for him, the kind of offer that they would give to a Murad Watson in the summer of this year. They didn't want to give to the tight end from Purdue because they didn't want that to impact the discussions that they would have with guys like Colin Simmons and Anthony Hill and everybody on the roster that would be having their conversations about 2025 after the season's over. I don't know what the solution is completely because Texas did a great job. They ultimately retained almost everybody on their roster that they wanted to retain. They'd like to have kept Amari Niblack. They haven't lost any sleep over losing him. In fact, I think they would say, would they have gone after a guy like Jack Injuries had they kept Amari Niblack? And the answer might be no, or it might be the overall feel and need of that position would be such that maybe he wouldn't have been as quiet. Like there was a desperation to get that done that he felt Texas felt. At worst, it's a wash. At worst. I think Texas came out better in that deal, if I'm being completely honest. I don't think they would make a trade. They wouldn't trade Texas A&M Jack Andrews to get Amari Niblack back. And that was the only guy they really lost. But, boy, they had a lot of work to do in the spring in the portal. And it proved to be more difficult than they probably wanted. They probably would have been more aggressive at wide receiver had they known that what was going to become available later in the year in the portal at wide receiver wasn't as good. I think they would have looked at, defensive tackle. They were super aggressive. Maybe they'd be more aggressive on the offensive line. That if you knew early on what was going to become available and what wasn't going to become available, maybe you would appreciate what did become available with knowing what you know. So the thing that they got to figure out is, did the way we did this, did it work out in a good enough way that we do it exactly the same way, or what would we change? This is the question. And I think it's, when you think about what 2026 is, I think right now on paper, it's the single greatest chance that Texas will have had of winning a national championship going into a season since 2009. And before that, 2005. And before that, 1983. It's a big deal. And again, it's one of the reasons why I think when you look at what they've done in the portal this year, why they went and got guys that would have multiple seasons of eligibility remaining and less on grad seniors, less on just regular seniors, guys that have 1 year of eligibility remaining, because a guy like Jack Injury shows up and in theory, he plays with Arch Manning in both seasons. He's your tight end for 2 seasons unless somebody better emerges, whether it be Jordan Washington or whether it be Nick Townsend or whomever it might be. But your baseline is a guy that is the second best from a yardage standpoint, returning tight end among all major college tight ends from last season. Not terrible. You take that. So I think there has to be a tweak, but I wonder what the tweak is. I haven't talked This may be a question that I have this may be something that I put in the war room or something in a couple of days from now. And that, what is the lesson to be learned? What is from the way it was handled last year? How can we do things differently that would allow us to be more active in the portal in in December, knowing how busy everything's going to be? What can we do different from how we handled it? We're going to do the NIL the same. Do you take some of your big dog guys and get that stuff handled in November if possible? Look, Colin Simmons, from what I know, and this is all unofficial, and to be fair, if anything with Colin Simmons has changed in the last 5 or 6 months, I wouldn't know that. I haven't asked. When I got my last Colin Simmons update, presumably like that was the update for the year. Colin Simmons is taken care of. He ain't going anywhere. What I was told that, this time a year ago, and we've talked about this a lot, kind of the baseline height, the ceiling for salaries was like $750,000. I think there were a slew of Longhorns that were making $750-ish. Don't get too locked into a number. I don't want somebody to hit me up and be like, no, you're wrong. 5 of them were only making $650. It's all ballpark, but that's the range where guys' heads started hitting the ceiling. I think that Anthony Hill, Colin Simmons, those types of dudes, I think they were probably in that ballpark. This year, slap a mill on top of that. This year, those guys are probably closer to $2 million than they were $1 million a year ago. The top of the food chain guys. Well, the question I would have is, they would have known that those guys were coming back next year. Do you lock those guys up? Now, the other thing is, I think there's a sense that those guys are taken care of for multiple years, but these things are always changing. One of the things I think that sometimes gets lost is you hear a guy gets an X amount of David Stone. Let's talk about David Stone for Oklahoma, right? Because he's coming into his second year, and OU approached him about taking less money in NIL, that he'd come in and reportedly was making in that area of kind of what we were talking about with like the $750,000 range or something like that. And they wanted him to basically go down to maybe the half that. But what if he'd been an All-American? What if he'd been at the defensive tackle position, what Colin Simmons had been at the defensive end position? Then he's like a $2 million a year player, and they're adjusting. Then the thing that you agreed to over 3 years is a moot point because that player's market value has changed, and he knows that he can go out there and get it. And he knows that every school that in a major conference has an injection of cash. I mean, there's more than $1 billion hanging in the balance on this settlement. That settlement doesn't go through. Like I said, that's probably the show for tomorrow. Because you guys, nobody's really prepared for what the hell is going to happen if that judge overseeing that case doesn't approve the settlement. The sport will be, just so you know. So I think even I don't know what the answer is to how you would tweak that. But I do wonder when we get there, and look, like I said, I'll dig around. Now that the question's kind of in my head, I will ask. But it is one of the things I'm thinking about, like what needs to improve. I think you'd like to get your business, as much of your heavy lifting done early as possible. That's what we've learned, that schools are going to take care of their best players. We didn't, the talent pool was down in the portal this year from the previous year anyway, but what happened in the spring fizzled. And I think in retrospect, Texas probably needed to be more active early. So what do they need to do to make that happen? I think that remains to be seen. I think they'll have to think about it, but I think that's one of the questions that has to be on their brain. I also wonder, when you think about, this is probably my biggest, and man, if you watch this show at all for a long enough time, and by the way, Vivek, I see your comment where it's like, Man, Simmons can name his price for his third final year in college if he has a Von Miller type year. Now, look, I'm predicting, Vivek, that he's going to have like 15 sacks this season. I'm predicting that he's going to have this number 2 because he's potentially going to play in a ton of games. He's potentially playing an NFL regular season this year in terms of game volume if Texas goes as far as we think they might potentially go. So I think he's going to have that kind of a season. I think he's going to be first-team All-American. And yeah, man. And so if you're Texas, do you wait? Can you wait on a guy like that? Because that guy, if somebody was going to offer him $5 million, I mean, these are, again, until we know what's in the settlement, until we know what is Colin Simmons' fair market value in NIL. Is Deloitte going to say that maybe the number 1 defensive player in the country has a ceiling or floor? Like, I don't know. Like, these are all rhetorical questions at this point. We do not have answers to any of them, but I don't know. We'll have to see. But, one of the things that Texas was worried about a year ago, and look, they're right. If Colin Simmons and his agent had known in early January that Texas was later going to give $1 million plus to a guy like Murad Watson, oh man, he's probably worth like 3 times that. I mean, they probably don't want me saying that out loud. Sorry, coaches. If anybody's watching the show and you're like, catch, shut your mouth. Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, we're watching recruits right now. You think about the tight end, Mark Bowman. It talks about him getting $2.5 million. The USC's breaking the bank for a tight end. Well, if that's what a recruit who's a tight end is going to make in the Lord's year of 2025 going into 2026, then what is an actual All-American edge rusher worth in his prime with a season to go? So it is one of the things they'll have to work with is, when do you negotiate with your players? When do you go, oh, shit, that guy's going to get paid, and we better make sure that we don't lose him. And I'm sure there's a difference, but like, they got deals done after the season's over. I'm sure there were conversations that took place. I just wonder if that can be adjusted any, and look, I know somebody asked earlier, will somebody ask a question of Sarkeesian? I wonder if we were to ask him this question. Who knows? Maybe I'll get Onward to ask this at SEC Media Day, or maybe there's a day off the podium or something. There's a way to ask a question where, because I wonder if Sarkeesian would give the answer. I wonder if we ask Sarkeesian this question, because we've seen the coaches, Kirby Smart brings it up at the SEC meetings just last week, where it's like, oh, we were doing all this work and we were making $10 million a year, and then they're making us work really hard because all this stuff's happening in December and the kids shouldn't have it. Like, that's what Kirby was doing. He was crying. He was cry-assing away about how hard December was. And in a month where he made over like $1 million in cash. I'm sorry you had to juggle 1 week of a game plan and recruiting in the portal at the same time. Oh my God. Are you going to be okay, Kirby? Whew. Thank God he's still with us. You could kill a man to have to do all that work. People in coal mines right now are blushing at the amount of work these head coaches have to do. But I do wonder if we were to ask Sarkeesian, hey, given that what happened, what would you change? What has to change? Do you do it exactly the same way? I wonder if he would feel like that's the secret sauce, and we won't say that. I won't say that on the record because I wouldn't want our competition to know what we think the secret is. Or is it so obvious that you can say it and it's just the thing that everybody's learning? I don't know. We'll put it to the test at some point. I do want that question asked because I think this is one of the big questions facing the program going into a 2026 season where the national championship is the bar or bust in all probability. I think another area, this is my biggest. I think it's the single biggest thing that Sarkeesian has to think about. And it's the hardest one he's going to have to deal with. Where is he comfortable giving up some responsibility? Because you watch Kirby Smart talk about what they went through, and you watch the players, the coaches that were in the playoffs talk about December and the stress and the negotiating and the recruiting and the game planning, and Sarkeesian calls his own offense. And then you wonder, why isn't the red zone better? I have said that I don't think Steve Sarkeesian makes it to the end of the decade at Texas. It's not really because I think there's any one place that he'll go to. It's that I don't think I know I've never watched a head coach at Texas have to do more, juggle more, have more responsibilities, more major decisions. College football really is more like pro football than it's ever been before. And that is a sport that has incredibly talented people. And, they don't have 2 major jobs. They've got 10 major jobs. And all the guys that are in those jobs have to be the best of the best at what they do, because if you're the head coach or the general manager, you have to trust what they say. You have to say, hey, who should we take at quarterback? And you need to be able to trust that the guy who's giving you that answer isn't somebody that once he tells you the answer, you're like, I like this other guy better. Thanks, but no thanks. I watch film myself. No, you have to be able to trust your people. And I think that Sarkeesian is the decision maker in every area of the program. That I don't think anything happens that he's not in control of. And I wonder how long that can sustain itself. Like, you can say you're fine now. You can say that you're fine in a year from now or 2 years from now, but are you going to be fine in 5 years from now? Can you do this and keep it up? And I have heard from people behind the scenes that, like, you can, if you're around Sarkeesian, as good as he is, there are times where you can feel the weight of the job on his shoulders. It is not like that dude's in his early 50s. This dude's got a newborn child too. Like, look, all I'm saying is, I think the greatest single thing that Sarkeesian has to do is he has to look at all of the stuff that he puts on his burden. And he's got to decide, is there any of this that I can hand off to somebody else? And look, man, I know it as much as anybody. I did, look, not to compare my job with Steve Sarkeesian, and there's a million more things that he has to do than I do. But in my own world, like, I take on a lot. I do a lot. I try to do everything. And I can remember Anwar and I were having a conversation about the Orange Bloods YouTube experience a couple of months ago. And Anwar was like, hey, man, I want to be more involved in everything. Now, look, the old catch might have said, what do you mean everything? What do you mean? You want to be involved in decisions and stuff like that? Because that's what I do. I do everything. Catch 10 years ago would have been like, no, man. Did you see me? I'm like 5'10". I'm almost Napoleon. I'm in control of everything. We had this conversation like a couple of months ago, and I know I need to delegate better. I know in order for me to be great at the things I need to be the great in, like, sometimes I have to give some of this up. And I told Anwar, oh my God, yes, you can be more involved. Please take it. Yes, I want it. And I don't even know that would have been necessarily the response that he would have expected, right? Because I think he probably, when I started working with Catch in 2014, the Catch in 2014 would have just bulldogged his way through it and said, no, I got it. You just worry about what you worry about, and I'll be in charge. Get older, man. Like, I don't even have a newborn in the house. And I'm not quite as old as Sark. And I'm like, I can feel like I need to delegate better. In my own way, my own little corner of the world, I'm speaking from experience. I need to delegate better. I look at Sark and I'm like, man, I can relate to that. I see all of the things that he wants to be in control of, that he thinks he needs to be in control of. And the only thing that I see, I just wonder, man, how long are you going to be able to do that? And I look at guys, I know you guys will roll your eyes, but I look at the Jurgen Klopps and the Pep Guardiolas in world soccer, and they stay at a job. And it's like being the president. It ages them. They do everything. They do everything. And they make like 7 or 8 years and they're done. They're done. And I don't want that of Sarkeesian. Nobody wants that. I mean, Steve Sarkeesian is UT's greatest natural resource. And what I think Texas and Sarkeesian have to do is they have to realize Arch Manning's not the greatest natural resource. None of the other coaches are. Not Brandon Harris. It's Sark. Sark's the greatest natural resource. What do you have to do to make sure that you've got that greatest natural resource for the next 10 years? Anything beyond that, hey man, we can't trip if he makes it to the amount of years that Mac Brown made it, right? He makes it to in his 60s and then is out. He says, I'm tired. I need to go do something else. I don't want to do this anymore, like whatever it might be. He wants to go be DKR and just play golf and chill out and not be stressed anymore. Hey, if that guy makes it like 15 years, we're there, right? So, how do you keep that guy though until that moment? I think everybody's got to realize, hey man, you cannot keep doing this. Something's going to give if something doesn't give. And I don't know what that is. I don't know what it is. I have suspected, because one of the things that's crazy about the portal is while he has people in the scouting department that he trusts, my interpretation of how the portal works is that Sark's the guy that vets the players. He's heavily involved. They don't make decisions on players that Sark doesn't lead, just period. And all of that's occurring at a time when, like they're oftentimes responding, not all the time, because there's always conversations with agents and stuff like that where, you'll have an idea. Like Barry and Brown is a perfect example. That guy finally entered the portal this year, but he played footsie with it for a couple of years, and Texas was completely aware of that because people connected to Barry and Brown was getting the word out. Like, hey, this might happen. Be aware. It happened with Isaiah Bond 2 years ago, where Texas was waiting for him to enter the portal, and then he didn't. And then Nick Saban retired, and then he did. But they were waiting because they had heard. Well, that happens a lot of times, but a lot of times they're reacting. They're responding to guys that have entered the portal. It's like, okay, you're doing your due diligence there. And I think what I have suggested that I think would help Texas out, and these are slim margins, and this isn't me taking a knock at anybody, certainly not me taking a knock at Brandon Harris, who I think is one of the best in the business at what he does as a general manager, and that job has like a million layers to it. So it's not about that. I have always thought that Texas needs to have the single best scouting department, college scouting department in the country. Does anybody think Texas has that? Has anybody ever heard that Texas has that? No. Look, and we know that Texas fans and the media and everybody in general of Texas had something. Remember when Alabama had like 97 analysts, and people were like, oh my God, look at all the analysts that Nick Saban has. We would talk about it if Texas had a super advantage in the scouting department that was aiding them every single day, week, month, year in the portal. I have always been on the front foot of saying, I think that's something that Texas needs to be the best in the country in. That's something that you can control. You can't make players enter the portal. All you can do is be prepared when they do and not responding and not trailing and not, always reacting to events after they've occurred. You're ready. Guy enters the portal. What's our scouting report on this guy? Who evaluated this guy? Let's talk about it. So I think Texas should beef up its scouting department, and they should have a guy who's in charge of scouting like the Dallas Cowboys do. And he doesn't have the title of general manager, but they let Will Clay do the damn thing. They let him handle the draft. They trust him to do the draft. When he gives an opinion on who they should take, Jerry didn't overrule him for Johnny Manziel. They listen to the guy they trust. And I think one of the things I think Texas needs, and I think this would help out Steve Sarkeesian immensely all year long, but you know when it would help him the most? December. The moment of the year where he's finishing off the recruiting class, finishing off game plans, SEC championship, first couple of rounds in the playoffs potentially. When he's oh, by the way, Christmas, because he's got a newborn child, and it'll be the kid's first Christmas this year. And I'm sorry, I had kids. You're not allowed to not pay attention to the kids at Christmas. Just juggling all of that, take the portal out of his hands as best as possible. Have it set up so that all Sark has to do is see like 30 seconds. Hey, Sark, there's a kid named Emmett Mosley. Oh, yeah, no, I remember him. Check out what he's done. Here's our analytical breakdown on him. Here's how this is what we lay it out. This is what we think it could be as a sophomore in this offense. This is what we think he can do as a junior. He's give Sark all the intel. Don't make Sark do all this himself. And it's not completely like that, but Sark's doing the heavy lifting. He demands it. It's what he wants to do. And I think it's one thing, if you could find one thing that you could control from my perspective. And maybe Sark would say, "Love, I need to do this. I love that. That's my favorite thing about doing the job. I love combing through the film." Okay, whatever. If it's something else, it's something else. But this you can control. And it's funny because when the Jim Nagy hire at Oklahoma was made, and I think this is where Anwar and I had our disconnect on this subject. It wasn't that Jim Nagy was better than Brandon Harris. I don't know that anybody's ever said that. But he's elite at one specific skill and nowhere near as diverse in skills as Brandon Harris. And Brandon Harris has probably got like 12 skills that he might say are super skills. But Jim Nagy's got one. He scouts the hell out of guys. He's the guy that the NFL depended on to run the Senior Bowl, to find kind of under the radar guys that he could put in front of their eyeballs to provide the most value for these offseason games, right? And so you put him in charge of your scouting department. And it's like, yeah, that's the type of hire, and give that guy, let him build a staff and let him run your scouting department. And then suddenly you have a database and you have intel, and every kid that's playing from the state of Texas on a major college or a small college, you are on it like stink on you know what. Then when it's time, that guy gives you the answers instead of you having to both ask the questions and then find the answers. He has the answers. And then Sarkeesian's got to trust that guy's good enough that I don't need to second guess him. And I think it would help Texas to have that. I don't think they have that. And I don't care what title you give the guy. I don't. I just think, is there any reason why the University of Texas, inside of its football department, shouldn't have the best college scouting department for specific use for the portal than anybody in the country? No. Why? We wouldn't say, well, indoor facilities don't matter. Don't worry about it. We'll be fine. We have indoor facilities. And look, we've been in the back-to-back national semifinals with the bubble. We don't need anything else. You wouldn't do that with facilities. You would admit we need to upgrade. We need to stay ahead of the times. We need to be elite. The only way you argue with me about this particular point is if you just want to argue with me. Because there's no reason why the answer should be no, Texas shouldn't have the best scouting department in the country. They spend money on everything. Why not? That seems important. It does. Because next year, when you need, I don't know, a tight end, because you couldn't go out in December and get the guy that you want, you already, like they have in baseball, right? Hey, who are the top 15 left fielders in Double A and below from teams in the AL West? Go. It's like, 2 minutes later, here's the report. Let's start working down the list. That's what Texas needs. And I don't think they quite have that. And you know why I know they don't quite have that? Because there's not a single son of a bitch from Texas. And I say that with loving terms because I'm a son of a bitch. It's not a bastard either. I'm a bastard. I once did a podcast called The Red Bastard. Nobody's called to tell me, Ketch, you're wrong, man. This stuff that you're talking about, we've had that for years. We do that now. We have the best scout. Nobody does that. Dude, if I get anything wrong in any report that I ever write, I find out about it. Oh, and sometimes it's vicious. You've been around these parts long enough. Guys have had 30-year relationships with you, and when they tell you something, it cuts to the bone. So when I make mistakes, believe me, there's a rush to find out. I mentioned this like a couple of weeks ago or a week ago or maybe a couple of days ago. I don't know. But when we got a detail wrong in the Eyes of Texas controversy, we had reported that somebody's wife was at the, I'd have to go back. It's been a few years now. It's been 5 years. The details are a bit fuzzy. If I went back and looked at the report, I would immediately know what it was. But we had reported that somebody was in a meeting that wasn't in a meeting. Now, the meeting took place, and everything that we reported happened in the meeting took place, but somebody's wife wasn't in the meeting, and we said she was. And the school made an elaborate effort to reach out to reporters that they give information to for access. And those reporters were quick to try to debunk our report on the sole detail that one of the people that we said was in the meeting wasn't in the meeting. And it was true. Like, we misreported that. But everything else, the contents of the meeting, that the meeting took place, like all of that, nobody else disputed. It was just, so look, I'm saying, I'm telling you right now, Texas doesn't have that. What I'll hear, what'll get back to me is like, oh man, Brandon Harris is great at looking at film. And it's like, no, it's not about that. It's not about Brandon Harris. Brandon Harris is like one step away from Steve Sarkeesian. That dude's doing like 9 jobs. Remember those? I'm old. But back in the day, In Living Color, the TV show that the Wayne brothers did, they did that skit where like the Jamaican guy would have like 100 jobs. His kids would have like 9 jobs. They'd be 5 years old. It was like the whole skit was in this family. Like everybody has multiple jobs. Like that's him and Sark. They both are those dudes. How many jobs you got? I lost count. I just get up and work all day. What do you do during the day? Like 9 jobs. And believe me, look, man, I know. I got a couple. I know what it's like. So, yeah, that's at some point you're probably going to need to like think about Brandon Harris as your second best natural resource, and how do you protect him so that he doesn't eventually take a higher paying, cushier job that doesn't cause him to like age like Obama aged as a president, or I guess pretty much anybody as president. Everybody ages pretty crazy. GW had that same thing going on, like Texas Rangers era CEO versus president. Like, you know, it happens. A couple super chats. Jay Lee for $5. I'll go back and make sure I didn't miss any in a second. Is there a solution to keep guys from having great seasons and then holding their team hostage for money and threatening the portal to the highest bidder? Not really. Not really. Now, I mean, Jay, I suppose there could be poison pills and contracts that if a guy were to break the contract, you know, we've seen talks of this if somebody signs and then leaves. But, you know, these things, I think schools are trying, but I haven't heard that anybody's just locked in. That, you know, I think even like, you know, look, I've had, you know, like in the state of Texas, and maybe I'm just off on this, but like, you know, I've had right to work issues. There was a guy that worked with me at Orange Bloods that I gave like 5 new contracts to over 3 years. He was constantly getting raises, and I was constantly taking care of him and everything I could do to help. And we were constantly tweaking the language of his contracts. And I had a no compete in there. I had, you know, and it was like, well, no, this guy, you can't keep this guy from taking a job or taking money somewhere else. Like, I don't know. Like, it seems all really tricky, but these things don't seem to be, they seem to be kind of one-sided affairs. A guy like Brandon Baker, or we mentioned David Stone from Oklahoma, their expectation is that the money that they're keeping stays the same. So if Brandon Baker showed up last year for $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, my expectation would be that that's what he's making this year. Otherwise, we'd be reading a David Stone type headline about how Texas wanted that guy to take half as much money because he hadn't yet emerged as a starting offensive lineman. But no, those guys, it works one way. But if Brandon Baker had been like, yo, I'm going to bounce, I'm not happy here, it's kind of a one-way street. And Jay, I have not yet really heard of the dynamics in play that would keep, and maybe some of that is some of these dudes are going to have lawyers that are not going to let them sign agreements that potentially allow them to lose that leverage. The schools are a little bit over the barrel. They kind of have to do what they have to do because they don't want these guys to go to the portal. They don't have the leverage to oftentimes insert maybe the type of poison pills that would preclude some of these guys from having that type of leverage. Jay Lee, $2. Just wanted to follow up. You didn't have to do that. I'd have put that up there. Hasn't really happened yet to us, but it will. No, hey. And Jay, Texas hasn't had to do, for as much money as Texas has spent in the portal and in NIL, they haven't had to deal with a quarterback yet at all. Quinn Ewers ate what he killed. Say what you want to about Quinn and his family, but like they got in the game. They got their hustle on. They didn't need collectives. They got paid. Arch, same thing. He doesn't need a collective. No offense to the collective. But there will be a time, and who knows, like maybe Diabell, maybe the trick is, man, you just got to keep recruiting. A kid's dad has to be worth 50 mil. 25 mil. I don't know what the number is. Has to be worth 10 numbers left of the decimal. They have to be worth that much. And then maybe if they play quarterback and have family with that much money, then it won't matter what you pay them in NIL. I don't know. But Texas right now has such a huge NIL bill, and it has nothing really to do with the quarterback position at all. And one of these days it will. And look, where Texas likes to shop at the quarterback store is elite of the elite. And one of these days, Texas is going to have to pay a quarterback $5 million a year in NIL. And that's just going to be what the world that Texas lives in. Let's see. Let me just go back. I'm looking at the chat. I want to make sure that I didn't miss any super chats. And then there's a lot of chatting. I should have put that thing up on the scroll today. My bad. I forget that the Football with Friends guys do that. All right, let me scroll through here real quick. Just want to make sure I haven't missed any super chats or if there were any key questions. I basically did like an hour-long monologue because I'm wired like that. I once did a 3-hour show for Yahoo Sports Radio, the nationally syndicated show, 3 hours every day by myself. Trust me, an hour of just stream of conscious talking with no script. I do that with my eyes closed. Cousin Drew and talking about the nitpicks. Third quarter is a good one. Be cool to stop losing our minds for 15 minutes. You know what? Okay. I know what you're saying. Yeah, touche. Chris Bennett said Feinbaum may have cursed Texas this morning on ESPN Get Up. I just saw the tweet where he said Texas is the favorite to win it all. Chris, ESPN's FBI did that yesterday. I think even without those two things happening, there's a good chance that Texas was going to be a preseason number one, which implies that they would be the favorite to win it all. I guess that's slightly different than whatever Vegas might put up, but Arch Manning is plus 600 right now to win the Heisman. That's okay. Interesting. Those are not good odds for a guy that started. He's the favorite. So I don't know that it's Feinbaum, really. Alan was talking about, let me put this up here. Was talking about, I think, the red zone issues and said maybe Neil Brown behind closed doors will help. Maybe. I will say, look, I think Sark, from what I hear, does a good job of listening to his analysts on the X's and O's standpoint. I think he's a good listener. I think he respects coaches. I think ultimately he's going to do what he's going to do. But, it can't. That's a good hire. Will it improve Texas in these key areas? Man, that's hard to quantify. But I do think it is taking a step to try to do the thing that needs to be done. I don't know what this Vince Young conversation was in the chat. I'm still kind of scrolling through. Just wanted to make sure that I didn't miss anything because I really didn't pay attention to the chat. There was a Vince Young's knee wasn't down. What the hell have you guys been talking about in the Specs chat today? You know what? We're caught up with the super chats. I don't know what you guys were doing. We'll wrap it up like that. Alan will get the last word of the day. Sandman. Yeah. Guilty as charged. By the way, I need to shave. When you're doing these solo shows, the camera gets up close and you can really see like, oh, the thing about my facial hair is it just ages me. When I shave, it makes me look like 10 years younger, but a little bit of facial hair, and it's like, oh, you look old, dude. So I'm going to go maybe shave and try to make myself look a little younger. Who knows? Guys, enjoy the rest of your day. Do me a solid. Again, like, comment, subscribe to the page, get notifications. Thank you for watching. The show brought to you by the Texas Card House and Hijack Poker House Divided. We'll be back tomorrow. Like I said, good chance. We'll be talking about the settlement and the big old scary monster hovering just around the corner. That's the show I think I'll be doing tomorrow. So until next time, you kids don't go do too many crazy things, or maybe so. Like maybe that's exactly